award-winning media entrepreneur and author of She Takes on the World is here to interview director and series creator of ProjectExplorer.com, Jenny Butkos. Please welcome Natalie and Jenny to the stage.
Hello, it's actually me first, and then I'm gonna interview Jenny. So my name is Natalie McNeil, and I am local. I live local. I've been in Kitchener-Waterloo for a long, long time, and I love it. It's my home, but I also think globally, and I travel a lot. I've traveled to over 60 countries now. And you may have read that in the Grand magazine that I was honored to be featured in for this current issue. And I think it's really important that even though we live here, we do think globally. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned from my travels is that we are all connected. What we do affects people that we may not think it affects. So it's really important to always incorporate that into our lives. And one of the people who I've been honored to meet through the power of connections and the power of the internet is my guest today, Jenny Butkos. She is the creator and director of ProjectExplorer.org. Her travel series has been viewed by millions of people around the world, so please welcome Jenny Butkos.
Thank you, Natalie.
So today we're going to be talking about three major segments, and that's projects that we've done, people, and also places. So we're going to start off with the projects. I want to hear from you about what your last project was, because your company and adventures take you all over the place. I love reading about your latest stories and things that you're up to. So tell us about the last project that you did.
Okay, so the last project I did, and just to explain a little bit about what Project Explorer does, is we're sort of like the travel channel for young people. So the last series we just did was in Costa Rica and Belize, and that includes 40 3-minute videos, which take about 40 hours a piece to produce. Just one, 40 hours to produce just one from start to finish. So Costa Rica and Belize, everything from how the coral reefs form to local cuisine to language lessons, the Mayan temples in Belize. That's my last series.
Amazing. And what is the process for creating the series? I mean, do these projects find you? I personally like to let my projects find me, but how do you go about choosing where you're going to go and film?
So the first time I didn't go to school as a filmmaker, so I'm not a filmmaker, I'm a Shakespeare expert. So the first project we decided to do was Shakespeare's England. It was easy, I could speak the language, London's easy to get around, and I knew the subject matter. And then we started asking our viewers, where in the world do you want to learn about? And one thing that kept coming up with parents and teachers and children was Africa, Africa, Africa. And some people didn't realize that Africa was a continent and not a country.
One of my biggest pet peeves.
So we decided to go to South Africa, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that they had been given the FIFA World Cup, so there was all this excitement about South Africa. Nobody really knew a lot about it other than safari animals and Nelson Mandela. So that one sort of picked me, and then after that, Queen Rania of Jordan called me and said, what will it take to get you to come to our country? And then the Mexico Tourism Board called me and said, what will it get to get you to come to our country? Thailand did the same thing. Costa Rica and Belize did the same thing. And my next series is in 3 weeks in Mauritius. So the tiny island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean called and said, what is it going to take to get you to come to our country?
And through all of this, I know we talk all the time about how connected everyone is. And I think one of my biggest lessons, the thing that made that lesson really hit me is I was in an airport in Peru last year. I had just wrapped up one of my big projects called Out My Window. It was a documentary that explored the lives of 13 people living in high-rise buildings. And I found myself in this airport talking to this gentleman, and he was like, well, I don't really get what it means to be a media producer. What is that? What do you do if you're a media producer? So I started explaining to him what this project was all about. And just as I was doing that, this woman turned around in the airport and was like, oh my God, are you talking about Out My Window? And I turned around, I was absolutely shocked that she even knew what it was. And it turned out just a few days before, she had been looking at the project online, had written down my name to get in touch with because she had a similar idea for a project. She was from the media center in New York. And here we were in Lima, Peru, and she knew who I was. And that made me really feel like we are all so connected and the world really is quite small. Do you have an experience like that where it's hit you, or a story that you can share where you felt like the world really is smaller than some people think?
I've never been in Peru and had someone know my name. You know, when I started doing this, started being a filmmaker, a documentarian, the first series I went and I just told stories about what I thought my viewers wanted to know. I think it's not so much connectedness, but we're all sort of seeking the same answers, or that we have the same curiosities. That came in South Africa, and it came from a group of students that I met. Filming at a school was not on my schedule, and I met an educator who said, "Can you please come speak to my students? They've never met an American." So I went to this township school, a school of about 1,500 students in a township with 70% unemployment. So you can imagine access to the outside world is not too great. So how we view the world through pop culture and media and what we see in the news is exactly how everyone else views us as Americans, us as North Americans, other countries. And these students ask me questions like, how much bling do you have? How many cars do you have? Their only context of what went on in North America was music videos. So I don't have a similar story, but if you want to learn about what it's like to live in a different place, go meet the people who work there and go talk to students, because they have no filter. They'll ask you anything. So that's what I do all the time now. Is the first thing I do is go visit students in a school, and I realize that everybody's asking the same questions. The same questions follow with students in Jordan. The same questions follow with students in Thailand. They may not speak the language, but it's the same exact questions.
What's coming up next for you and Project Explorer? What's your next project, and can you share some of the details of that?
Okay, so the next project, in 3 weeks, I fly to Mauritius. It's this tiny little island. It takes 45 minutes to drive across the entire thing in the Indian Ocean, just to the east of the southern tip of Africa. So we'll be filming there, and Mauritius is known for being home to the dodo bird, which is the first time in human history that people realized they could kill a species to extinction. So the dodo bird was basically beaten to death by the Dutch sailors that came. So that's what Mauritius is known for. And then beautiful tropical beaches, but you'll have to tune into the series to see that. And then after that, in the fall, we're going to Azerbaijan, which is another really off the beaten path sort of place to go. And the reason we chose that is because they have an Olympic bid for 2012. So we wanted to see what Azerbaijan was all about. And I have a television series in production. So my series is viewed online, but right now I have a television series in production.
Anything you can share about that?
Unfortunately, no.
No. What's the most fulfilling part of the work that you do?
Traveling. The most fulfilling part, I came from a small town of 800 people. 98% of those people were white and all of the same religion. So traveling is something I never in my life thought I would do. I didn't get my first passport till I was 24, and I was the first person in my family to get a passport. So I'm now 10 years later, slightly more than 10 years later, I'm on my 50th country. So that's part one of the most fulfilling. The second part is when I get to visit schools in North America, especially schools where kids don't have the ability to travel. And I've met children who have saved enough money to apply for their first passport based on me coming in and talking to them. And that's hugely fulfilling to have someone say, I'm going to go abroad because you did it, and I can do it. What's the most fulfilling for you about your job?
I would actually say the travel is a huge part of the fulfillment for me too. It's just having that connection to people, meeting new people, exploring places. I'm not one to do touristy things when I travel. I always want to go off the beaten path. I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make. You might be able to agree with me on that one. A lot of people will go down south for a vacation. They'll go and bask in the sun for a week, and sometimes you need to be energized. You need to to refresh and unwind, and that's okay, but you miss out on a lot by doing that. You miss out on a lot by going to a resort. So I think just going and exploring, getting lost places. I love leaving a map at home and just getting bus tickets or subway tickets, or just walking and getting lost and finding my way back to the hotel or where it is that I'm staying, and just talking to a lot of people. There's so many interesting stories that you hear. Actually, that's a great question for you too. Is there an interesting story or someone that really stands out from the travels that you've done? Story that really touched you?
That's an interesting question, because there have been a lot of people who have really inspired what I do. I've been fortunate enough to meet Nelson Mandela in my life. Shaking his hand was probably the most inspiring thing that's ever happened to me. You're talking a man who spent 27 years of his life in prison, and then when he got out, the first time he was allowed to vote, he became president of his country.
Amazing.
That's pretty impressive. I've also worked with a woman, a supermodel. Her name is Petra Nemkova, and in early 2004, I believe, she was in Thailand, and she survived the tsunami that hit Thailand by clinging to the top of a tree with a broken pelvis and hanging on for 8 hours. A local community rescued her, and when she was in the hospital, the only thing she could think of is, when I get out of here, I want to go back and rebuild their school. So today she's built over 50 schools around the world in disaster areas. So that's a pretty incredible story to think, the worst of what could happen to you in your life turns around and becomes the best of what could happen to you in your life. But there are countless stories when you just talk to people, and they don't have to be famous. They're just local people doing incredible things every day. And that's part of the great part of my job, is I get to go seek those people out and share their stories on a global stage.
What does one talk about when they meet Nelson Mandela?
I said happy birthday. I was at his 90th birthday party. South Africa is a very special place to me, because that's where I think I found my voice as a filmmaker. And as a white person going into a country that's had such racial tensions, to be so welcome in that country and sort of have the keys to the country to do whatever you want to do film-wise. So Nelson Mandela, a little older, you don't get to spend as much time with him, but Archbishop Desmond Tutu invited me for tea, and we got to interview him. And we asked him the question, what was it like to vote for the first time in 1994 as a black man? And he leaned in and said, what was it like when you first fell in love? So that's the power of your vote.
Wow. Would you say that he's the most inspiring person you've ever met? Who would be the person that's inspired you the most?
I'd say Petra Nemkova. This is a young woman. She was 25 years old, had no interest in education, did not have children, but to survive something and go back and give back to the global community. We're not talking any one specific country, any one specific allegiance. When there's a natural disaster, all these first responders come in and the immediate needs are taken care of. But what happens when they leave? Schools aren't rebuilt. And the first thing a community needs after the first responders needs is to get children back to school. And the fact that a 25-year-old woman recognized this and has built 50 schools around the world, that's hands down the most inspiring person I've ever met.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of meeting her actually at an event in New York, and I did find it fascinating that, not only was she physically seriously injured in the tsunami, but she also lost, was it her fiance, I believe? She also lost her fiance, and to just have the strength to wake up from all of that and say, this is what I need to go do, is incredible. Such an incredible story. So I'm going to change gears a little bit and we've been talking about people, but talk a little more about people. And when I was in another story from Peru, actually, that place really touched my heart last year. There was a woman who taught me a powerful lesson that I just wasn't expecting that day. And I was sitting in a square, and she was selling crafts. But it wasn't just about the craft that she was selling, because everyone was selling the same thing. It's that she told a story with everyone that she sold. So it started with her coming up to you and saying, oh, hello, my name is Maria, and this is the work that I'm doing. Where are you visiting from? And she started a conversation and a dialogue, and I talked to her for probably half an hour and, of course, wanted to buy every single thing that she had. But the difference, what set her apart, was that she had this incredible story and was sharing it with the world. And I just realized that in business, in anything that you do, really, the power of story is so important. And she was just someone who happened to come into my life that day. Is there someone who, not on a celebrity scale, but someone who you've met that's taught you something unexpected?
Unexpected, no. While it's great to film with the celebrities and it's great to film with the kids, some of the most interesting people I film with are people doing process jobs. So factory workers, I'm kind of obsessed with filming the process of how something is made and the individuals it takes to make that, so how it gets from original concept to end concept. So I've filmed at bell factories in London, like the old church bells, and the people there are just, they love their job, and that comes out in every single thing that they do. I've worked with handicraft people in Mexico and Thailand, and just watching the entire process of something being built that's been handed down from generation to generation. They're the storytellers of their countries, and you know, for me, those have been some of the most interesting people to meet. One of them, his name is Pantalon Ruiz in Mexico, and he makes traditional Oaxacan carpets, and it's been done in his family for over 200 generations. So to watch the loom that his grandmother sat at and his great-grandmother sat at, just, you know, reminds me that everybody has a job to do, but when you do it with passion, that really comes through.
Wow. One of, you probably know Jacqueline Novogratz as well, from
No.
the Blue Sweater Acumen Fund. So Jacqueline Novogratz is an incredible woman who's doing a lot to alleviate poverty around the world by applying business solutions. And she has an incredible story as well. She was, as a 25-year-old woman, in Rwanda, and she wasn't sure what she was doing there, where it was going to take her. And she was running one day over the hills, and she came across this young boy who was wearing this blue sweater with zebras on it. And it made her stop in her tracks, and she thought, oh my God, that is my sweater from when I was a kid. And it turns out, rewind to back when she was a child, she was given this blue sweater with this zebra motif on it and Mount Kilimanjaro in the background. She wrote her name in the tag, and she loved the sweater for many years until she started getting a little older, and a lot of people started making fun of her for wearing this sweater. So she got home one day, she was really upset, and she put the sweater in a Goodwill bin. And her mother brought it to the local Goodwill store. Years later, here she is in Rwanda, did not speak the same language as this child, to ask him to take off this sweater so she could check it. So she ended up just going behind, flipping up the tag, and her name was written in that sweater. So here's a woman thousands and thousands of miles away from her home, and she runs into this boy who has the sweater that she had when she was a child. And she realized then that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, and has been talking about ways to alleviate poverty ever since. And what I find really fascinating about Jacqueline is that she always talks about how when she was in her 20s and she first went to Africa, she was there like, okay, let's get my hands dirty, let's save Africa, let's save the people in Africa. And you've been to Africa as well. People don't need saving. They don't need the kind of help that we often want to give them. What do you think some good, positive solutions are for actually changing the world? And for people who want to give donations or contribute somehow to that bigger picture, to making a difference, how do you recommend that they do that in a way that isn't just necessarily throwing your money to an organization? Because I think we both know that doesn't always work. And more times than not, it doesn't work at all.
Yeah, for the most part, it doesn't work. I like to say people need a hand up, not a hand out. So Africa's looking for a hand up. Third world countries need a hand up and not a hand out. And that starts with education. So if you want to empower someone in another country or even in your own country, give them an education and you've given them the world. So I'm not a big fan of giving to charities unless it's disaster relief. I think that that's okay because there's some very basic human needs that people need when a disaster strikes: clean water, medical attention. That's okay. But I think Haiti is a really good example of this. So I was in Haiti the year after the earthquake, and I went to the first field hospital, and this organization had been there for 10 years prior to the earthquake. And what they're doing is, rather than bringing in Western doctors with their Western solution and their Western ideals, they're training people in Haiti to become physical therapists and doctors. So now those people who have the skills now have jobs, and their kids can go to school, and they have money for food, and they're fixing their own country. So rather than take all the talent out of a country, go in and cultivate that talent there. So I worked with a gentleman who had lost both of his legs in the earthquake, and he had been fitted with prosthetics. 3 months after that happened, he started training to become their physical therapist for people with prosthetics. He's now the head of prosthetic physical therapy a year later.
Wow.
So hand up, not hand out.
Did you do a series in Haiti?
I filmed for 3 days in Haiti. So I didn't do a full series there just because of the logistical sort of nightmare around getting things done in Haiti. I mean, it's just physically difficult to drive around Haiti because of all the rubble.
Your trip was also canceled several times, right? It was a long process for you to even get into the country.
Yeah, it was canceled 3 times due to political uprisings. So every time we tried to go to the airport would be closed.
So during your time there, in those 3 days, what are some other stories? Who are some other people that you met that had a really hopeful or inspiring story?
Well, all I saw in Haiti, and Haiti is exactly what I thought it was going to be. So if you'd seen the news coverage after the earthquake, that's exactly what it still looks like. Very little cleanup has been done. But aside from that, all I saw in Haiti was positive stories. So I visited a school in Port-au-Prince. It's considered a UN no-go zone. It's probably Cité du Soleil. It's considered the most dangerous location in the Western Hemisphere. And I went to visit a school there, and at this school, it's the only hope the community has. It's 400 school students, preschool to 8th grade. All of those students get an education. There's facilities for them to shower. They get 2 hot meals a day. They get water purification tablets. They get laundry services, and they get an education. And so for me to go into there, the most dangerous city in the Western Hemisphere, when I showed up, I was met by local people, and they said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to the school," and they said, "Everything is fine," because they know that those children are the hope for that community, so if you're working with that school, you're fine. I was also there for Carnival, and it was beautiful to see a city in Jacmel, which is outside of Port-au-Prince, 100,000 people celebrating for the first time after such a devastating event.
Are you ever terrified in some of these countries that you go to? There are a lot of security risks, and you are putting yourself into danger a lot of the times.
Yeah, but I don't let it stop me. I mean, I live in New York City, so New York City can be a scary place. The way I see it is, if anything's going to happen to you, it's going to happen no matter where you live, small town, big city. You just have to be a smart traveler. Especially as a woman, and I travel with an all-female film crew, which is unheard of in the world today. But as long as you're safe and aware of your surroundings, I think I'm more nervous that my camera's going to get stolen and the footage is going to be lost. So actually, I did have an incident in Haiti where I was attacked, and I just kept yelling, "Save the camera, save the camera."
Well, everything is on there, right? So I'm going to switch into places, because we've both traveled a lot. You'd over 50 countries. I think I'm up to 62 or something now. And a lot of people, when I talk to them about all these places that I've been, they're shocked. Like, "Oh, wow, how do you do that, especially at such a young age?" And I think it just, once you get out there, I feel that you really do catch that travel bug that everyone
It's like a
talks
drug.
about. It is, and you just want to keep going and going. So do you have a favorite country that you visit over and over again, or a city?
I have 2. So I have London, again, total Shakespeare nut, so I love going to London. It's easy to get to, it's easy to get around, and the food is actually very, very good. So if you have misconceptions about bad British food, you're wrong. Go to London, it's amazing. I'm actually going in right after I get back from Mauritius. I'll be there for the Queen's birthday. And then the other is Johannesburg, South Africa, because, again, that's where I found my voice as a filmmaker. And it's the first time I stopped being a tourist and started being a traveler, connecting with local people. So I have a group of people there I consider my second family. Natalie knows because she follows me on social media. They call me their sister. I'm invited to all their important life events. So I've been there 7 times, and I've been to London a dozen now.
Would you live anywhere besides New York?
London.
London?
I like walking cities. I like cities where you don't need a car. I like cities where you can get out and, I find we spend too much time in cars for most people in America, especially where I grew up. And we had to drive an hour to get to swim practice. I was a swimmer, an hour each way in the car, and I just feel like that's such a waste of time. So, London.
I agree.
Would you live anywhere else?
Well, I love New York as well. New York is a city that I feel my heart is often in. When I get there, I feel like I could be fully present. And just the energy there is incredible. I don't know. Internationally, there are a couple places I'd like to try living. I'd love to try living in Thailand. I'd like to try living on the Amalfi Coast in Italy. But there are places that I'm not sure I would actually stay. So we'll see. It's something I think about often. But again, I'm happy living locally as long as I can get out globally and see the world and have all of these amazing experiences that you can only have when you're traveling.
Right, but you don't need to even live in a big city to do that. And that's like the message behind my films, is that even in the smallest communities, you can start to think globally and experience globally.
Yeah, and I think even in your own town, in your own city, to just go out and explore, find things that you've never seen before, never experienced before in your own city, I think is really important. Is there a country with the best food for you? Let's talk about food, because one of my favorite things to do when I travel is eat.
Aren't you a vegetarian?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm a
very
vegetarian
hard.
too. That makes it very difficult to travel. Actually, I do eat seafood, so Greece, best seafood in the world. And we would get it when it would come off the boat, so you'd go right into the docks and pick out the piece that you wanted, and the next stand over, someone would gut it and grill it for you. They also did that in Mozambique. It was like 50 cents for a whole fish, and if you wanted a Coke, it would be an extra 5 cents. So anywhere that are excellent seafood communities are okay with me, but Greece is just the top.
Biggest culture shock for you?
The Middle East. Yeah. I was prepared to be covered in the Middle East. It's like I'm really white, so I stand out when I travel in the Middle East. Like there's white, and then there's like really blonde white, and that's me. So that was a big culture shock for me. It was also going in as a female boss. Some of the men that I worked with in Jordan didn't want to deal with me as the business lead. They wanted, I had a male cinematographer at the time, so anytime it came to money or appointments, they wanted to deal with him, but I only worked with him for 2 weeks. So when I was in the Jordanian desert, they made me an honorary Bedouin man for the day, and that was the only way I could pay them to be considered a man, because they don't work with women that way.
Wow.
Have you had a culture shock like that?
I have not traveled to the Middle East. China was a big culture shock for me. I was in the middle of nowhere, completely rural area, and that opened my eyes to so much. I think it was a really good experience. It made me a lot stronger as a person, but it was just a huge culture shock. I don't think I ate for 3 or 4 days. There was nothing that I could really find to eat. It was hard work. It was a chore to get water. It was a chore to be able to have any sort of nutrition at all. And that was a huge shock for me. So I think it's important to have those experiences, though, because then when you do come home, you can appreciate everything so much more.
You know, they have these little books now that you can flip through and point to the things you want, like universal language books.
I have seen those, and there's an iPhone app as well that will speak on your behalf.
Sort
Have
of.
you tried that
Yeah,
one?
sort of.
Yeah, not like in the commercials, how they market it. Is there a place that you've discovered part of yourself?
That's a tough question. I think not necessarily that, but there's a place that I found my inspiration for what I do. So I used to work at an investment bank prior to doing what I do, and they sent me to Japan and Hong Kong, and I didn't speak the language. I didn't understand how to get around. No one had ever told me, like, there's somebody in the hotel that can help you. So I really disliked the experience, but I had my passport, and I decided I was going to go to Greece. And when I saw the Parthenon for the first time, and it was something that I had learned about that in a textbook, and I'm standing here looking at it now, that sparked how different your life would be as a child if you're able to experience things that you learned about in a history book. So I didn't really find myself. I found what I wanted to do in life through travel.
Me too. I actually was in Czech Republic, and that's what put me on this whole path of entrepreneurship and everything that I'm doing now. I just had this huge aha moment randomly in the Czech Republic. And just like you said, when you go to places like Greece, Rome was another place for me that to see the Colosseum, to walk, I mean, everything there has some sort of historical significance. You can't walk without something on your left and something on your right being part of history in some way, and to experience that and to read about it along the way, it was just an incredible experience. And that's why I love what you do so much, because I think you open up horizons for a lot of kids around the world who don't necessarily get to learn about the things that you teach them, don't get to experience other cultures. And even if they're just doing it in a video, I feel like the way that you film and the perspectives that you bring to everything that you do is really inspiring. And as you know, I'm a big fan. Last question. If people can only if there was one place that they could have on their bucket list that they absolutely had to travel to, where would you recommend? A place that everyone has to see in their lifetime?
That's so difficult. I would put Rome on that, just because it's something that everybody learns about in school. I mean, India is high on my list, but India is not travel light. So I'd have to say Rome for me. Yeah. I mean, you're talking the streets that, like, Julius Caesar walked. To like walk in that path is just, I've seen the pyramids. The pyramids I was underwhelmed by. Mexico has better pyramids, and it's closer and it's cheaper to get there, and the food's better.
I would agree with Rome, and I think that's a really great point to leave it at, is just to walk in the footsteps of people who have come before and feel that connectedness to the world. And with that, I'm going to end it. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Natalie.
And I hope you all enjoyed the interview with the lovely Jenny Bukos of ProjectExplorer.org.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, Natalie MacNeil and Jenny Bukos, everyone. And Natalie, if you do end up moving to Thailand, I'm coming with you.